Hey guys, it's Mrs. Barrett. I am here in sunny Florida right now for a volleyball tournament. But I wanted to stop and read our story because when last we left Tori, she was just showing her dad that she was on the boat. So we're ready for chapter 7. Ready? Here we go. Father turned and looked at me without comprehension. It was that curious truth. The familiar in an unfamiliar place is oft unseen. Have you guys ever been anywhere and you see somebody who's kind of out of place and you're like, wait, I have that sometimes happen when I go to Costco. Sometimes I'll run into you guys and you'll be like, Mrs. Barrett. And I'll be like, my students. Okay, let's keep going. It took some full moments before he grasped that it was me. When he did realize it was his daughter who stood before him, she whom he thought he left behind in Providence, his face displayed complete bewilderment. What? He stammered. Are you doing here? I almost said, my will has decided my destiny. Instead, I replied, I'm going to San Francisco. Father, perfectly dumbfounded, managed to say, but how? How did you get here? I told him. Does mother know? She approved. Did she? He cried, newly aghast, and I suspect feeling somewhat betrayed. But what do you intend to do in California? I'm quite sure, Father, that you can care for yourself. For my part, I intend to take care of Jacob and keep our fine new home. Meanwhile, you shall be free to gather that abundant gold. At dinner time each day, I shall serve you your meal, and you shall regale us with your daily adventures and your new wealth. These words, though surely stilted, had been well practiced to soothe his ear, to calm him down. I had composed them with that goal in mind. But though that is what I said, let it be clearly understood, my vision of the future was to be far more energetic than that. I cared little for gold. My desire was to become fully independent, have intelligent people around me, and somehow, I was not exactly sure, amaze the world. I had already learned that for a girl, the more ambitious you are, the better it is to keep it within. What did my father do when he realized I was on the ship and that there was no way he could send me home? He did what many people do when confronted with something that they can't control. He acted as if it were always meant to be. What's more, the constant degree of congestion on the ship was such that no one in authority ever realized I was dodging a fare. You may be sure Father was too embarrassed to acknowledge it. There was something more. I do believe Father looked upon me with the realization that I was far more capable than he had thought before. That pleased me. But now that I had resumed my female garb, I was confronted with another problem. As I learned, there were no separate accommodations for females. The ship's chaplain, who was migrating to California, was traveling with his wife. No doubt because of his calling, they had their own tiny cabin beneath the rear deck. As for the 2 other wives on board, one with a little boy, they simply shared bunks with their respective spouses. As for other girls my age, there were none. I will be the first to admit that this was a circumstance to which I'd given no thought. Further, no complaint could be made to the ship's captain because, to begin with, I had no business being on board. And as I have said, my father and I were not going to draw attention to my dishonest presence. However, considering how passengers were lodged on that 'tween deck, my being there proved no great difficulty. Jacob and I shared a shelf, head to toe, toe to head. Father, with a gallantry I had not expected, took his sleep on the deck planking, with no softening save some blankets. We slept in our regular clothing. But the ship's owners, seeking to maximize profits by the flood of passengers seeking gold in California, had booked far more people than the shelf beds they had hastily constructed to accommodate them. Thus, people were truly a swarm on their berths, on the deck, in every nook, cranny, and corner of the ship, wherever they could sleep, sit, or stand. Since the little light that existed on the 'tween deck came from a few lantern lights, one had the impression of a dark, crowded church with barely a clear vision as to who was next to you. Nor did it smell good, being stenchy and close. Though all were required to clean their spaces, it remained a filthy place. Hardly a wonder, then, that when the weather was bright, fair, and mild, and even when it was not, many a passenger, including me, spent their days on the main deck, breathing the unsullied sea air, the clean sea air. When I needed to change my clothes, the chaplain's wife was kind enough to provide me and the 2 other women moments of privacy in her cabin. However thrilling the departure of a great ship might be, and the undeniable adventure of being a stowaway, the 7-month voyage of the Stephanie K, which followed, was, I fear, tenfold tedious. The truth is, our voyage was disappointingly dull to the extreme. If I were to describe it in full detail, you would put these pages down and never return. Would you enjoy reading? February 20th, sailed 6 knots. February 21st, sailed 7 knots. Spied ship on distant horizon. February 22nd, sailed 3 knots. Saw nothing but waves. They were much the same. I trust you will agree that it is wise I don't share every moment of my voyage with you, but you should know some details. The ship. The decks never stayed level or still, but continuously shifted so that the timbers, like old people's bones, forever groaned and creaked. Food. It was grim. Salted meats, hard biscuits, beans, and bad-tasting water. Eating 2 times at 2 long common tables on the 'tween deck were raucous, with displays of truly appalling manners. Passengers, endlessly impatient, constantly complaining about crowded conditions and our slow speed, criticizing the captain no matter what he did, forever arguing amongst themselves about matters mostly minor. Some things were unusual. I received 14 offers of marriage. When the first came from a tall gentleman with an enormous mustache, I was shocked. When the second proposal came from a dandy with the smell of rose perfume suffusing the air, I was puzzled. By the 14th proposal, I could only laugh. Naturally, I refused them all. I didn't tell Father of these offers. I did tell Jacob, and I do believe it began to alter his vision of me. He looked at me differently. It is one thing to have an older sister. It is quite another to have a married sister. It was as if only then did he realize our lives would be different. But then, I think boys think far less about the future than girls. Regarding amusements, whenever I saw someone reading a book, particularly a multi-volume novel, which was more often than you might expect, I made bold to inquire if, when they were done, I might borrow it. Thus, I read fine new publications such as Oliver Twist, Wuthering Heights, and Vanity Fair. Books different one from the other, but good and happily long. I extended the time of reading by sharing them aloud with Jacob. In fact, almost all my time was spent in Jacob's company. But then, I hold that the more one loves another, as Jacob and I do, the less reason there is for talk. Silence is a form of tranquility. Beware companions who require talk. Being together should be enough. Can you think of anyone that you enjoy just being with? You don't always have to be talking to. You just enjoy being together. So it was that for many a long hour and days, Jacob and I leaned against the bulwark rail and did little more than gaze upon the endless gray-blue sea. At night, I read him books by lantern until we slept. To be sure, during the voyage, there were moments of interest. Most exhilarating was when it seemed as if the ship were in peril, such as when we passed through what the sailors called the Willy Waws, with roiling, savage, wintry tempests at the southernmost point of South America. One's life, I decided, is enhanced when embracing danger. How cold was it when we went around the Horn? Ice crusted the rigging and coated the rails and had to be broken off with mallets. Those are like hammers. Why, the captain's beard froze so that he had to lean over a heated stove to thaw it out. Winding our way through those tempestuous channels, it took 4 men to control the steering. The ship bowled and dipped so that with no sides on the shelf berths, people rolled out as they slept. One man broke his arm. Many became sick. Cape Horn, the forlorn bit of land which marked the southernmost spot of South America, rose, I was informed, to 1,200 feet and was snow-covered. The captain's skill brought us out into the Pacific Ocean. Remember, they started in the Atlantic Ocean by Rhode Island, and once they go around the tip of South America, they're in the Pacific Ocean. And we headed north, where the seas gradually became calm and the sun grew warm. The cities at which we paused, Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, Callao in Peru, to take on fresh food and water, were fascinating to see, quite exotic. But only I seemed interested. The truth is, there was little concern upon the Stephanie K for anything other than San Francisco and gold. If anticipation were riches, we would already have been the wealthiest ship at sea. I admit I, too, spent much time imagining what lay before me. I thought of San Francisco as a city of prodigious beauty set upon a picturesque bay, so it had been described. A metropolis full of riches and elegant things, altogether serene, with strong, handsome, and dare I say it, wealthy people. It was oft called El Dorado, recalling the mythical city of fabulous wealth. This is to say, I populated the city with every bit of my wistful imagination. As for where the easy gold might be found, I envisioned a stately forest with wide, earthy paths bordered with glittering nuggets of gold. which I gathered like dropped ripe apples. Quickly, our family life would be endowed with fabulous riches, like those in the finest of fairy tales. But as we were coming up the west coast of Mexico, drawing ever nearer to our goal of California, things began to change for me yet again in a major way. Chapter 8. Father sat Jacob and me down near our berths on the 'tween deck. We were hardly alone. Many passengers were sleeping or sitting about us playing cards, reading, or talking. As the ship rolled and pitched, the whale oil lamps that dangled from the ceiling swung like clock bobs, causing shadows to leap about us like agile acrobats. "I have learned some things of great importance," Father began. "As you know, we are approaching San Francisco. I've been talking with some of the men who will be going to the mines. Everybody agrees upon some things. The first thing, the gold will not be found in San Francisco. One must go some 80 or more miles along the bay to what are called the diggings. Obviously, I must go there. The second, Tori, it will be unwise for you to go to these diggings with me. The conditions there, I've been reliably informed, are not at all suitable for a girl. I thought I'd easily find us a house there. I've learned such homes do not even exist. Also, people insist that it would be just as big a mistake to leave you, Tori, alone in San Francisco. Therefore, Jacob shall stay with you. While I go to reap my share of gold, you two must stay behind in the town together." "Left behind?" cried Jacob. I too protested. "But these men you've talked to have never been to San Francisco or the mines. How could they know what the conditions are?" "I assure you," said Father, "they know much more than you. And may I remind you, dear Victoria, that you were not invited to come. You chose," he said in a lowered voice, "to make your way upon this ship on your own. I trust the same strength of character will guide you in San Francisco. Beyond all else, I feel it is my obligation to gather wealth before Mother comes. She deserves that, and I intend to prove myself to Aunt Lavinia. But I am your father," was his closing argument. "You are my daughter. Therefore, you shall do as I say." "Dear Father, of course," he continued with barely a pause, "I'm informed that San Francisco is a fine modern city. Before I go to the mines, I promise you I'll find a suitable house and provide sufficient funds so you may take care of it. I shall hire a servant. I'll enroll Jacob in a good school. Don't forget, I have every expectation that Mother will arrive not long after we get there. You'll need to be there to welcome her. The truth is, her health may require it. The three of you can wait in perfect leisure for me to come back with my fortune. Then we shall have what we once had, and more." Father adamantly refused to listen to any objections from Jacob or me. In other words, while he went to gather his gold, Jacob and I must remain in San Francisco alone. How did I feel about this proposal? When I first heard it, I went to the main deck and with Mother's red shawl around me, stared angrily out at the sea. But the more thought I gave to Father's decision, the more my temper shifted from vexation to consent to delight. Belatedly, I realized I was being given the opportunity to prove how truly independent I was. I would live in total freedom. I could not ask for more. Once I embraced this unexpected independence, I was full of eager anticipation. For the first time in my life, I would, excepting Jacob, live alone. As for taking care of my brother, I thought nothing of it. We remained as close as siblings could be. We would have no conflicts. School must take up most of Jacob's time. I assumed we would have a servant to attend his needs. While that happened, I intended to live free, far freer than in Providence. Let me further confess, I begin to think how wonderful our new wealth would be. In other words, I could hardly wait to arrive. We only had to reach San Francisco for my full liberation to take place. We continued to sail up the Mexican coast, as we were informed, for we could not see it, drawing ever closer to the city of San Francisco. Alas, the trade winds were such that we had to go far north and west as if heading for the Sandwich Islands, and then tack about as to sail south and east. If you've ever been in a boat that is a sailboat, you have to use the wind to get somewhere. So normally, if you're headed right where you want to go, and the wind comes from this way, it's going to push you over that direction. So sometimes you have to do these zigzag moves. That's called tacking. Just as we reached our long anticipated goal, it was August 1849, and we had been at sea for 6 months. We were again thwarted. A thick fog obscured the California coast, hid the coast. While our captain insisted we were close to the narrow entry known as the Golden Gate, which would lead us into San Francisco Bay and the fabled city, the passage was not easily located. The captain likened his task to threading a needle. To proceed without precision, he announced, was extremely dangerous. What's more, the flow of tide in and out through this Golden Gate was famously fierce. We might, he warned us, be wrecked. To be sure, the captain took pains to tell us that those within the bay were no doubt just as frustrated about getting out, since the fog inside was probably just as dense there. It was all wonderfully emotive. Shadowy fog, hidden vistas, possible wreckage, the true exhilaration of travel. All we lacked were pirates. In any case, we were forced to sail back and forth, north and then south, for 5 days, trying to avoid, on one side, the rocky, far-off coast Farallon Islands, while we tried to find, on the other side, the Golden Gate, the way into the great San Francisco Bay and the fabulous fields of gold. As you might expect, after such a lengthy voyage, my anticipation was high. Jacob and I stood with many other impatient passengers upon the deck and stared out day after day, hour by hour, into the wet and swirling ashen air. I, for one, found the thick fog to be wonderfully haunting. What wonders was it concealing? Oh, the sweet suspense. Yes, it was frustrating. Still, is there not something sublime in frustration when you know that joy must arrive shortly? It's like a coming birthday. You know a present will be given to you, but you can't bring the date forward. You guys ever feel that way when your birthday is coming? There, someone would call as the fog lifted momentarily. Brown and green promontories appeared, a log upon the sea, a leafy branch. Then, the sighs of dismay from all, when the next moment everything became lost to view and the miasma reclaimed the world. At last, however, the haze melted. A lovely buttery sun revealed itself on high. The sky was blue. Midst enormous excitement and the highest expectations, we sailed through the Golden Gate with its jagged and steep cliffs to either side. How awe-inspiring! Next, the celebrated San Francisco Bay unfolded before us like a fan of paradise. The inland sea was truly immense, big enough to hold all the navies of the world. Waters sparkling as if alive. Pods of dolphins cavorted about our bow. Overhead pelicans barked and gulls squawked their welcome. We sailed by a high hill and what appeared to be a small, uninhabited, and rather spectral-looking island where there were no dwellings, only countless birds. Then, for the first time, there before me, I beheld the celebrated city of San Francisco. What I saw stunned me. I wonder what she saw. But first I want to go back. Do any of you have an idea what this is talking about? The island where there were no dwellings, only countless birds? Anyone have a guess what that is? Think about San Francisco and what islands there might have been there in 1849 that didn't have any people on them but had a bunch of birds on them. Okay, guys, when we start chapter 9 next time, we're going to find out what Tori sees in San Francisco.